Good evening. Thank you, Mark, for preceding my regular good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Thank you for tolerating my still worse voice the previous 2 nights. This is already a big improvement. Last few words on Ayin Testament base for tonight's daf, which is Daf Pei. Let's get started. Tanya, Rabbi Omer, Kol shiurin kulan b'kizayis. In general, when we speak about food, the shiur that we're dealing with is a shiur of a kizayis, the approximate size of an olive. And as will come up soon, a medium-sized olive. And says the Gemara, that's our general rule, but that's chutz mi tumas ochlin. But that's different than tumas ochlin, of becoming tameh through eating a particular food, which we'll detail a little bit later. And why there is it different? Because by tumas ochlin, sheshina hakasuv b'mashma'an, b'shirin chachamim b'shiuran, because the language that we had by tumas ochlin was different in the Torah, therefore the chachamim established a different shiur than the kizayis. The raya l'davar, how do we know that the change in language by tumas ochlin was significant enough? That we learned from Yom Kippur. The raya l'davar l'Yom Kippurim daf pei amud aleph, 3 lines down. How did the Torah change its language by Yom Kippur? Because the pasuk said milo seuneh. Now that's not a normal language of achila. It's not lo sochal like Rashi highlights. It's a strange language. If you're talking about a shiur for Isser, that's a strange language to say lo seuneh. Umay shinu chachamim b'shiureha. And with that change in language in the Torah, how then did the chachamim change the shiur? Kakosevas, they said it has to be this larger than a kibbutz shiur. Umar Raya Ladavar Yom Kippur. Why did we then bring Yom Kippur? Why did we need that at all? So the Gemara answers, because the Ime Hassam, had we only learned from the case of Tumas Ochlin, there says the Gemara, the language wasn't significantly different, as we'll get into in a couple of lines. The Ime Hassam, had we learned only from the world of Tumas Ochlin, Havamina Orcha Dekrahu, it's just regular language of the Torah. It does mention Achila, and maybe we should have assumed it's normal in the language of Tumas Ochlin. Kamash Malan, we learned from Yom Kippur that any deviation in the language requires a change in shiur as well. And what was the story of Tumas Ochlin? 6-7 lines down. So the Gemara says, by Tumas Ochlin, we said Kibbetzim in Olam. How do we know that by Tumas Ochlin, whereas by food in general, the shiur that we speak about, as we said on the top line of Pei Amud Aleph, is Kulan B'Kizayis. Here we're saying by Tumas Ochlin that it's Kibbetzim in Olam. How do we know that to be true? So Amar Rabbi Abo, Amar Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Abo says in the name of Rabbi Lazar, important to distinguish. In a minute, we'll see Rabbi Abo saying his own shita. But first, Rabbi Abo quotes Rabbi Elazar, and what does he say? The Amar Kra. What does the pasuk say? Mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel. Strange language of saying don't eat. Mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel, of all the food that you will eat. Ochel haba machmas ochel. It has to be a food that is a derivative of another food. What is a food that is a derivative of another food? So we're about 10 lines down. Says the Gemara, ve'ezezeh beitzas tarnegolas. This is a chicken. This is a chicken that has an egg. So the chicken is food and the egg is food. So it's ochel haba machmas ochel. Says the Gemara, why does it have to be an egg? Ve'ema gedi. Maybe it can be a small animal, a sheep, a goat, a calf. Why does it have to be an egg? It could be anything. The mother is also food. Why the distinction? Says the Gemara, no, it can't be a gedi. It has to be something like an egg, because the gedi is mechusar shchita. You can't eat the gedi as is. That can't be what the pasuk was referring to. So therefore, it must be talking about the beitzas tarnegolas. Fine, but we have a case of an animal where there is no requirement for shchita. And what is that? Ve'ema ben pakua, famous. Ben Pakua Burgers. It's the restaurant that one of my friends wanted to open. The Ben Pakua Burgers is if you shecht the mother and the baby in utero stays alive. So then the animal that was in utero doesn't require shchita. So what my friend wanted to do was to mate 2 Ben Pakuas, a male and a female, and have a whole breed of cows that didn't require shchita. So he wanted to open a restaurant called Ben Pakua Burgers.
So what's the mile?
It's cheaper. You don't have to hire a shochet. You can kill the animal b'nechira. The animal can be killed in any way, shape, and form. No isser. But you'd have to kill the animal just.
You still have to get rid of the blood, though, no?
What the Gemara is going to say exactly like you're saying in a moment. Correct. Exactly right. Still an isra of achila for blood. So yeah. So says the Gemara, ve'ema ben pakua. So says the Gemara, just like Gerald recommended, ta'un kriya. It's true that a ben pakua doesn't require shchita. However, it needs to be torn open such that the blood will drain out, because even if there's no requirement for shchita, there still is an isser of dam. Okay, fine. Ve'ema beitzas bar yuchni. Maybe we should say that it's not the egg of a regular tarnagolas, but rather the egg of a bar yuchni, a massive bird. The Gemara elsewhere says that this bird was so big that when it would move in the water, it would create waves that would cover 60 cities, so 60 islands. The Gemara, where was this? Chagiga, I can't remember. Horios, maybe somewhere Adios. I think it's the Gemara in Adios. Yeah, I don't know, whatever it is. So the Gemara says that maybe that we're talking about an egg from a very big bird. That would be a big kula. That if the only time there was tuma was if the egg was this big, if the shiur food was this big, that's a big kula. You'll rarely get to a bird this size. You'll rarely see food this size. Says the Gemara, nope. Tofasta merubalo tofasta muat tofasta, a well-known phrase in Shas, used all over the place in Shas, and here used to tell us that bird is too big. If you take on too much, you've taken on nothing, and if you take on too little, you've taken on an appropriate amount. It says the Gemara, okay, I understand the part about if you've taken on too much is an uncommon and unreasonable sized bird, but if tafasta muat tafasta, if what you're saying is that taking a small amount is good, so then great. Maybe we should say that it's a very, very small bird. We're 1/3 of the way down on Pei and Aleph, says the Gemara. Maybe the shiur for tumas ochlen should be learned out from the egg of a very small bird. We know that hummingbirds, for example, are tiny, tiny birds. They're very small. And other birds are also very small. So says the Gemara, maybe it's a very small bird. Says the Gemara, dezutar tuva. That doesn't work. That's too small. We need to pick a normal-sized bird. And that's the beitzas tarnagolas. And that is why, says Rabbi Abba in the name of Rabbi Lazar, that is why we need it to be the case that the shiur for tumas ochlin, to make a person tameh for a particular food, is a kibetza. And it is like the beitza of a tarnagolas. So all of that was Rabbi Abba in the name of Rabbi Lazar. Then the Gemara says Rabbi Abba didei, at his own sheet, he didn't agree with Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar didei learned the pasuk a different way. Omar, he said, Mikola ochel asher yeachel. What does that pasuk mean? Ochel shata ochel bevas achas. That's a food that you can eat all at one time. And says the Gemara that the Chachamim made a hashara, they made an approximation that the most that a person can eat at one time is kibeis habliya. The most a person can eat at one time is the size of an egg of a tarnagolas. End of that sugya. Anyways, in short, yes, in general, the rule is kizayis, but every time the Torah deviates in his language, the Chachamim deviated in shiur. By beitzas tarnagol, by tumas ochlin, we said that if a person, we're not talking about achila right now, we're talking about if a person touches an animal that is the size of a kibetza, it can transfer tuma, fine. And by Yom Kippur, we know, of course, that the Torah said lo seuna, and therefore the size wasn't the normal size of a kizayis, but rather of a kakoseves. Amar Rabbi Lazar, a fascinating idea. Anyone who eats chaylev be'isr, they need to write down how much they ate. You got to keep a food diary for all the chaylev you ate. Why do you need to keep it? It's only b'shogeg, of course, because if you're doing it b'mezid, you won't care about the onesh. But we want to know what korban chatas might you be obligated to bring should the Beis Hamikdash be rebuilt speedily in our days. So then what do you do? So says the Gemara, Rabbi Lazar says you have to write down how much you ate. Why? Shema yavo bezdin acher v'yarbe b'shir. Maybe another bezdin will come along and increase the shiur. So what does this mean? Increase what shiur? What are we talking about? So it says the Gemara, my yarbe b'shir, I'm almost halfway down on Pei Amud Aleph. What does it mean, yarbe b'shir? And so it says the Gemara, if you want to say that what the Chachamim might change is which kizayis we follow, instead of following a kizayis beinonis, which is the normal kizayis that we follow, maybe we'll be following a smaller one. And if you lower the threshold of the Isser, then that means you're going to be liable for more korbanos chatas, right? The smaller the shiur, the bigger the chumrah. Because if you ate 10 kizesim beinonim, but then the chachamim changed the shiur to the kizayis katan, you'll have to bring more korbanos chatas. So says the Gemara, that can't be. Why not? Because Tanya, the Brisa writes, the pasuk says that something that you would not do, had you known about it, you wouldn't have done it. Hashev miyadiyaso, maybe korban al shigagaso. And this we know is true. A person doesn't bring a korban chatas when they do the avera with no remorse. In other words, if you would have told me, Phil, don't do this, because if you do it, you'll bring a korban, and I would have stopped, that's the type of action for which one would get a korban chatas. But lo shav miyadiyaso, had it been that a person would not have stopped, even had they known the shiur, and maybe korban al shigagaso. So it says the Gemara, it's kind of backwards to say that we're going to lower the threshold of Isser from a kazayas medium size to a kazayas small size. It can't be, because we need to be able to tell you that you broke the threshold in order to tell you to stop. So we would need a minimum shiur. It has to be. It can't be that the chachamim will make the shiur smaller, and therefore says the Gemara a little bit more than halfway down. Ella, it must be that when Rabbi Elazar says that one has to write down how much chaylev they ate, because we're concerned that a bezdin might change the shiurim. Says the Gemara, what is that for? Ella says the Gemara, Delo mechayve korban ad deika kizayis gadol. Maybe they would make a kula, not a chumrah, but a kula, that they would expand the volume by which one should violate the threshold, thereby establishing that one may need to bring fewer korbanos. So says the Gemara, what kind of havamina was it? We started out this conversation with Rabbi Lazar saying that one is obligated to write things down about how much chaylev they ate, and that we were concerned about yarba b'shiur. What was the for Gemara's recommendation? Maybe the chachamim will say the kazayas is smaller. That's not yarba. So says the Gemara, that which you recommended immediately after hearing Rabbi Lazar Shita, you recommended and we rejected it, granted. But the fact that you recommended it is ridiculous. You recommended that maybe when it says yarba b'shiurim, that what it means is that we're lowering the size of the shiur from a kazayas, a medium-sized kazayas to a small-sized kazayas. You've lowered the threshold and therefore increased the number of korbanos that one would have to bring. That's not yarba b'shiurim. Says the Gemara, you're right, it's not yarba b'shiurim on the kazayas, but shema yarba b'korbanos machmas shiurim. Yeah, but the relationship between the size of the threshold of Isser and the number of korbanos to be brought will increase. So let's say that you ate 10 kizesim of chaylev, and then let's say that each chaylev brings one korban chatas, and then we say, no, it's not one chatas per one kizayis, it's every half of a kizayis is a chatas. So then instead of having 10 chatos, you'd end up with 20 korbanos, right? You end up doubling your numbers. So that's what the Gemara says was the havamina, rejected either way, but the Gemara was bothered by the presentation of how they could say that a smaller kazayis is considered marba b'shiurim. The Gemara says that wasn't the ribui. The ribui is that if they made the shiur of the kazayis smaller, it would then result in a ribui of korbanos. Next sugya, a little bit more than halfway down, 2/3 of the way down, Pei Amid Aleph, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yochanan, shiuran the onshin halacha l'mosh misinai, the shiur for an iser and its onesh, all of those are halacha l'mosh misinai. Says the Gemara, nope, onshin michtav ksive. That's not true. We often see that there's an onesh in the Torah. You have malkos. Yeah, there's a lot of things that there's shiurim in the Torah. What are you talking about? Says Gemara lahachi kamar. This is pshat. Shiurin shel onshin halacha l'mosh misinai. You're right. The onshin aren't, but the shiurim of the onshin. You're right that the onshin are listed in the Torah, but the shiur of the onesh is what is considered halacha l'mosh misinai, and a brisa to support Tanya Nami Hachi shiur shel onshin halacha l'mosh misinai. In that same brisa, we see another shita acherim omrim beis dino shel yavitz tiknum, that right after the times of Yehoshua, one of the first of the shoftim was Osniel ben Kenaz, and he was the one who established these shiurim. Says the Gemara, how can that be? No, you're not allowed to change what happened at Har Sinai. Remember that this is not even 2 generations away. Yoshua was alive at Har Sinai, and Osniel ben Kenaz was the next after Yoshua. We should not have any errors in our traditions at this point, but we did. So says the Gemara, what was going on here? Why was Yavitz, why was Osniel ben Kenaz the one who was changing things? Says the Gemara, he wasn't changing things. Things were forgotten, and then he came back in and he reestablished them for the sake of clarity. At the 2 dots, 3/4, 4/5 of the way down. Hashosim alo lugma. We know the halacha is that when a person should, to be yotzei kiddush, at a minimum one should drink a malo lugmav, 1 cheekful. But the actual language of malo lugmav doesn't say that. Malo lugmav implies both of his cheeks, 2 cheeks full, right? Pushed out with liquid. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel lo malo lugmav mamish. We should not assume that it's both cheekfuls. Rather, Ela kol she'ilu yisalkenu litzad echad ve'yira kimalo lugmav. Rather, the shiur that we're talking about is where it's only 1 cheekful and not 2. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work, because what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says v'ha'anan tnan malo lugmav. It doesn't say kimalo lugmav. It says malo lugmav, which implies both. So where you're just changing things as you wish. Says the Gemara, hold on one second. Ema kimalo lugmav. What the Mishnah means, and maybe we should even change the text, is to read kimalo lugmav, but it's not malo lugmav. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work either. Meisvei, we have a brisa that conflicts with this idea. What does the brisa say? How much does one have to drink on Yom Kippur in order to violate the Isra of Yom Kippur? 4 shitas. Beis Shammai says a revis, through and through, whatever revis is. Beis Hillel Omer Malo Lugmav. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Lazar Kit Malo Lugmav. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer Kedegmia. 4 shitas. Beis Shammai says a revius of wine, 3.5 ounces be'erech. Beis Hillel says Malo Lugmav. We don't know what it means yet. Rabbi Yehuda Omer that it's Kimelo Lugma. Okay, 4 shitas. So says the Gemara. There we can answer the same thing we said earlier. Mi adifa mi mas nisin du kimna kadesh shiur. Achanami kadesh shiur. What it means, what Beis Hillel meant, is that it was really just Kimelo Lugma, that it was 1 sheikful. So says the Gemara. If you're interpreting the shita of Beis Hillel as Kimelo Lugma, that it's only 1 sheikful, then we have 2 shitas in this brisa that are both Kimelo Lugma. Then says the Gemara, Ihachi Hainu Rebbe Lazar. Because what did Rebbe Lazar says? Rebbe Lazar said Kimelo Lugmav, and you just reinterpreted Beis Hillel from Malo Lugmav to Kimelo Lugmav, which means they're saying the same thing. Says the Gemara, you're right, they're saying the same thing, that they're both Kimelo Lugmav, but there's a difference between the Shita of Beis Hillel and the Shita of Rebbe Lazar. What's the difference between them? Ika Beinaihu, 3 lines from the bottom of Pei Mad Aleph, Ika Beinaihu Malo Lugmav Dachuk, when it's approximately a Malo Lugmav. So there, according to the Shita of Beis Hillel, so then it's going to be Malo Lugmav, it should be a little bit more. When it's only Kimelo Lugmav like Rabbi Lazar, so then it'll be a little bit more lenient. So that would be a difference between the 2 shitas. But nevertheless, we do still hold that Malo Lugmav, when we speak about it in halacha, is Kimelo Lugmav. Yeah. Kedegimia is the amount that your throat can hold in order to swallow it. Relatively small shiur. I presume a Malo Lugmav is much larger than that. How much can one hold in 1 gulp? I don't know. It's not that much. So that's the shiur. We don't pass it like that anyways, but that's Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Says the Gemara, hold on 1 second. Maski flar of Hoshia, im kain, havale mikule beis Shammai, michumre beis Hillel. We know that elsewhere in Shas, we have an exhaustive list of the scenarios where Beis Shammai was the mekil and where Beis Hillel was the machmir. And here, this case is not listed as one of those cases. So it can't be that this case is where Beis Shammai is more mekil. Yet what do we see in our brisa here? That Beis Shammai says a revius, and Beis Hillel says a larger share of Kimelo Lugmav. So this seems to be like a case of Kule Beis Shammai Mechumer Beis Hillel, but it contradicts with another Gemara where this is not included as one of those cases. Says the Gemara, Omar Lei, turning to the top of Daf Pei Amud Beis. Ki Ishil, when were Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel arguing? Be'og Melech HaBashan Ishil, they were talking about someone who is very, very, very large, not your average person. You're talking about Og Melech HaBashan. Now, Og Melech HaBashan wasn't a Yid. So we're not really talking about him. He doesn't have an Isser to eat on Yom Kippur. We're talking about an oversized human being. So says the Gemara, that's what we were talking about. Tohavu le Beis Shammai l'chumra. That according to Beis Shammai, who holds that a revis, no matter the size of the person, if what they drink is a revis on Yom Kippur, they're chayiv. Even Og Melech HaBashan or his Jewish counterpart, you have a guy who's 10 feet tall, 700 pounds. His head is the size of our body, and he has a tiny 3.3. He's chayiv on Yom Kippur. Huge chumrah by Beis Shammai. Masha'ein Kain, according to Beis Hillel, he'd have to have a malo lugmav, which would be a few gallons of water. It's a huge difference for a big guy, right? So that's the nafkamina. That's why the Gemara says that since the case where we saw the 4-way machlokas was talking about the case of the Jewish version of Og Melech HaBashan, therefore Beis Shammai is the chumrah, Beis Hillel is the kula, and it doesn't put that into question like we saw on the bottom of the previous Amud. Payim base second line. Maskiflar Abzera. Maishna Achila. The Kolchad V'chad B'Kako Seves. Why is it that when it comes to food, we remain objective with the shiur to say that it's a Kako Seves? Nobody negotiates a certain volume of food. Everybody agrees. Yet according to Beis Hillel, it seems to be that drinking liquids on Yom Kippur is relative. By the way, I would say that it may be relative within each of us in the room, within minute differences. Some people have a bigger mouth than others. I don't mean that metaphorically. I just mean just literally. Some people may have bigger cheeks. So if I have a cheek that can hold 4 ounces and you have a cheek that can hold 3 ounces, so then for me to drink 3 ounces is not asur on Yom Kippur midoraisa. It might be asur midorabanan. That's fine. But nisur doraisa, no. Wouldn't be chayiv for that. So why is it that by food, we only have an objective standard of a koseves, yet by liquids, it seems to be relative to the individual? So the Gemara answers, Amar le'abaye, and we're going to see this line 5 times in a row, maybe 4 times in a row. We're going to see it a number of times in a row. Amar le'abaye, kim lehu le'rabbanon. The rabbis hold as follows, b'kakoseves, that when it comes to the shiur of food, solid food, that in that shiur, debahachi meis vadaita, that generates yishuv adas. And batzir mihachi lo mesva. But less than that doesn't generate yishuv adas. And remember, what we're talking about is inui. And as long as you remain in the state of inui, you haven't violated the Isser Doraisa of eating on Yom Kippur. So until you have that Yishuv Adas, you're not going to be in violation on a Torah level. So says the Gemara, the Chachamim made the presumption that no matter what your size is, a kakoseves, that shiur is going to give you Yishuv Adas. However, line 6 on Daf Pei Amud Beis, B'shisia, when it comes to drinking, bididei meisvadaita, b'dechavre lo meisvadaita, that when it comes to liquids, only when the liquid is subjective, when it's applicable to you, does it give you yishuv adas. Masha'ein kain, the shear that applies to your much larger friend, that doesn't give you yishuv adas. Next question of the Gemara, Maskif lo Reb Zera, v'chola olam kula b'chakoseves v'og melech habashan b'chakoseves. Okay, I understand that in general, a koseves is going to generate yishuv adas. But if you have that Jewish og melech habashan, you're telling me that the same shear for one of us who weighs, 200 pounds, that guy is going to have the same level of yishuv adas as someone who weighs 600-700 pounds. It's og melech habashan. He's not going to be, that's not even a snack. That's nothing. That's a bite. That's not even a bite. So how can the Gemara say that the Yishuv Adas is the same for a regular person as it would be for the Jewish Og Melech HaBashan? Says the Gemara 10 lines down, Amar le'abayi, Kim Luhu Rabbanon, the rabbis have taught us that when a person eats a koseves, they eat that shear, it generates Yishuv Adas. And less than that doesn't. Miu, however, Kule Alma Tuva, for most people, for all of us in the room who are, within the normal realms, so by us, it generates a lot of Yishuv Adas. Masha'ein kein v'og melech habashan purta. When it comes to Og melech habashan, he'll only have a small amount of Yishuv Adas, a distinction to be made. Okay, next question of the Gemara. Maski flor of Zera. Basar shamen b'chakoseves. V'lulabe gefanim b'chakoseves. All right, you've told me how people might be different, but what about the quality of food? Well, you have a gesund steak, right? You pack it in. It's a koseves, beautiful. You think that's going to satisfy you the same way as eating some like branches from a tree? It's just not the same qualitatively. So says the Gemara, are we going to go so far to say that these are also going to be the same shear? Amar le'abaye, same line as we've seen before. Kim lehu le'rabbanon, the rabbis have said, Tebahachi meisvadaite, this is what generates Yishuv Adas. Bater mihachi lo meisvadaite, and less than a koseves doesn't generate Yishuv Adas. Miu, basar shemen tuva. If a person eats a fatty piece of meat, that will generate tuva, that will generate a lot of Yishuv Adas. And lulav gefanim, when one eats a small amount of the gefanim, a small amount of these leaves, of these branches, then purta, they'll have only a small amount of Yishuv Adas, but still in the category of Yishuv Adas. Maskifla, next question. Maskifla Rava, Kizayis Bechte Achilas Pras, Bechoseves Bechte Achilas Pras. We know that in order for one to violate an Isser, and on the flip side, in order for one to become obligated in benching, they have to eat a Kizayis Bechte Achilas Pras, they have to eat a certain amount of food within a certain amount of time. So what's strange, says the Gemara, is that it seems to be that a kizayis b'chtei achilas pras is normal, but a koseves, which is significantly larger, we said yesterday, if a koseves is larger than a kibetza, and a betza is double the size of a kizayis, let's say that it's 2.5 times larger, this koseves, says the Gemara, why would it still have the same amount of time in which to be consumed, the ktei achilas pras amount of time? That doesn't make sense. Koseves b'chtei achilas pras, Amar le'abaye, because kim lehu l'rabbanon debahachi meisvadaite. This is where a person gets Yishuv Adas. Betfei mehachi, if they were to have eaten the food over a more expansive amount of time, lo meisvadaite, that would not have generated a Yishuv Adas for the person. Maskif lo Rava, kizayis b'chtei achilas pras, chatzi pras b'chtei achilas pras. We have another case scenario where we see a distinction, which is that if a person were to consume food that is tameh, it would make him tameh with the shear of a chatzi pras. But that's a different shear than a kizayis. So why then would we say that it has the same amount of time frame in which to be eaten, which is kedei achilas pras? So answers the Gemara, because the case of chatzi pras is not what we're talking about. Amar le Rav Papa, hanach letumas kivia. When we talk about a person becoming tameh from consuming tameh meat, that's not a conversation. Delab deoraisahu. That is not a din deoraisa. Says the Gemara, really? Umi Omar Rav Papa Hachi, this is not a din deoraisa. Vaksiv v'lo sitamu bahem v'nitmeisem bam. V'Omar Rav Papa mikan shetumas gvia deoraisa. We see from here that there is a din deoraisa of tumas gvia. So you wanted to say, don't even bother asking the question. It's apples and oranges. That case is derabanan. That case is Derabanan and we're talking about Doraisa? No, it's also Doraisa. Says the Gemara, it really is Midirabanan, but Kras Machta Be'al. Really, the Pasuk is just a support, but it is Taka Din Derabanan. Huh? The Gevia is the body itself. If a person were to eat a shiur of food, their body becomes tameh from eating a certain shiur, a minimum shiur of food, which is in the shiur of a chatzi pras. It's totally a side din. It's just proving a point that when there's different shiurim, kezayis and chatzi pras, why do we say that the only time you break the isser is when you eat it within the same number of minutes, 9 minutes? They're different volumes of food. Why don't we make it commensurate? That if it's 2 units of food in 9 minutes, and if it's 4 units of food, it should be 18 minutes. But why don't we change the time frame? Says the Gemara, don't ask from there. That's the case is derabanan, and that's what the Gemara concludes here. Huh? Corpse. Yeah, body. It's a chatzi pras. I think a pras is multiple kibetzas. I don't remember. Does it say there? Okay, I'm not sure. I don't know. Sorry that I don't know. We're at the 2 dots, 15 lines from the. Shtei Shochakos is tight. It's not. Yeah, it's a. I don't know. I'm not sure of the reference, but it's 2 kibbutz. So it's 4 times the size of a kazayas. So if it's 4 times the size of a kazayas and it still has to be in bichdei achilas pras, it's very hard to violate that isser because you need so much consumed food in such a short amount of time. Okay, let's keep going. We're at the 2 dots, 4/5 of the way down on Pei Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Kol ha'ochlin. We said that in our Mishnah that when it comes to the isser of achila and Yom Kippur, that all foods are mitzdaref. So what about foods that aren't really eaten on their own? So the Gemara is now going to talk about salt and salad dressing. Nobody opens a bottle of Italian dressing and takes a swig. And if they do, that's really not normal. And nobody either takes a teaspoon of salt, not normal. So says the Gemara. Amar Papa, achal umtza, if you ate a piece of meat, umilcha, with salt, mitzdaref, we do combine the 2 of them. And ve'afal gav de lav achilahu, even though in and of itself, the salt is not deemed to be an achila, it's not really deemed to be a food, but kevan de achle inshe mitzdarfen, since people use it in this way, it is mitzdaref, it does get to be included in the shiur. So if you're 99% of the way there and 1% of your food is isser, so that last 1% will put you over the threshold, and you will have violated the isser of eating on Yom Kippur, even though salt in and of itself is not a food, but because it's a normal condiment, so therefore it's problematic. And Amar Reish Lakish, similar to tzir, tzir is like a salty type of liquid. So it's presumably something like salad dressing. Tzir shal gabe yerek. There's a liquid that's put on top of vegetables. Mitzdarev lechakos seves b'yom kippur. So it says the Gemara, that too is added. It says the Gemara pshita. Shouldn't that be obvious that the salad dressing is included? Says the Gemara with a brilliant response. Ma'udatema mashkehu. You might have thought that it was a mashke. Oh, that's brilliant. Maybe it's a liquid and it can't be mitzdaref to food. The fact that it's being used this way for food, it therefore transfers over its status from being a liquid to being a food. One more sugya, which will bring us to the top of Pei Aleph Amud Aleph. Let's continue. Amar Reish Lakish. Ha'ochel achila gasa b'yom kippurim pater. A person who eats achila gasa on Yom Kippur, they're pater. How do you do that without first eating achila that isn't gasa, right? Achila gasa is overeating, but you can't overeat without first eating a regular amount. So the Meforshim explain what's happening here. You are mamish stuffing your face on Erev Yom Kippur. The clock strikes Tzeisa Kochavim and you are jam-packed. Then you eat, that's called Achila Gasa, and halacha is that you're putter. You're not going to be chayev for that. My time up, because the pasuk says asher lo seuneksiv prat lemazik lo seune. Yeah, you're not allowed to eat. You need to afflict yourself. But if you're going to be damaging yourself, and we assume that achila gas is very bad for a person, so that's already no longer the isser of Yom Kippur. Now you've taken it even too far, and you can't say that that's part of the world of Inu. You've taken it too far. Amar of Yirmiyah, similarly, Amar of Yirmiyah, Amar Reish Lakish, Zar. If you have a non-Kohen, she'achal truma achilas gasa, he did the same deal. He packed his face with chulin, and then all of a sudden he finally ate truma, which he's not allowed to eat. So normally, if he had done such a crime, he'd have to pay chomesh. He'd have to pay a fifth. Here in this case, because it was achila gasa, says the Gemara 3 lines from the bottom on Pei Amud Beis, mishalim es hakeren, ve'enu mishalim es hachomesh. He doesn't pay the chomesh because this isn't a normal achila. He only has to pay for the principal cost of what he ate. Why? because it says ki yochal prat lamazik. It's only by regular achila. But here the zar, the non-kohen who overate, so that person was prat lamazik. Amr of Yirmi, Amr of Yochanan, zar shekoses seorim shel truma. If you have a zar, and as we turn to the top of Pei Aleph, Amid Aleph, who is chewing on seorim, which is an abnormal way to eat barley, shel truma. So the halacha is mishalem esa keren ve'enu mishalem esa chomesh. Why not? Because ki yochal prat lamazik. This is an unhealthy way to eat food. Break your teeth, break your stomach. This is not the right way to eat these foods. It's not good for you. And because it's mazik, so therefore we don't say that the person would be mishalem esa chomesh, which would be the normal crime for eating such a food that you stole from truma. But here we say that it's not the case. And the last case, we save the grossest for last. Says the Gemara, Amar of Shezvi, Amar of Yochanan, Zar, a non-Kohen, Shebala Shezofin, he ate plums, and he ate them whole, Shel Truma, Vihikion, and then he threw up, the Achlan Acher, and then somebody else said, that looks good. I think I'm going to have some of that. And then another person ate it. So then what's the din? How do these two people register? So Rishon, the first guy who ate it, Mishalem Karen V'chomesh, he's a regular eater. He ate food. So he's going to be Chayav Karen and Chomesh. But Sheni, the other guy who ate the leftovers, so Ein Mishalem Ela Dmei Eitzim, the Rishon Bilvad. This doesn't even have the status of Truma anymore. This is already vomited food. This doesn't have the status of regular food. And because of that, he is only chayav for Dmei Eitzim, whatever its value would be as fuel. We will stop right here. And tomorrow night, in Yirtzeh Hashem, we'll learn Daf Pei Aleph and as well Pei Beis Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
49 minutes for charity.